¿Qué significa ser Latine? Hi everyone, let's talk a little bit about what it means to be Latinx. The term arose in California in the 1850s, a kind of revival of Simón Bolívar's ideals of continental unity and partly in response to California's newly minted statehood. Before the Western Europeans colonized California, the Southern European Spaniards did, and the mixed descendants of that project wanted an identity in opposition to Anglo identity.
Cuando estamos aquí en los Estados Unidos, entonces la latinidad surge como un concepto a lo mejor que podríamos, ¿verdad? Para empezar, que viene de unas instituciones de poder, ¿verdad? Del gobierno, de mercado, industria, que entonces mira, sí, estas comunidades que supuestamente son asociadas con Latinoamérica y entonces tratan de manejar, de disciplinar, de regular, de identificar, ¿verdad? Y en ese proceso se crea una generalización, se crea un estereotipo.
I mean, this is what Latinidad looks like according to mainstream media. With BS like this, no wonder Black and Indigenous millennials of Latin American descent are calling for Latinidad to be canceled. Bye. Hashtag Latinidad is canceled is a social media movement all about reclaiming identity. Afro-Indigenous poet and cultural worker Alan Lopez helped popularize the cancel party. And many prominent voices like journalist and founder of the blog Una Latina, Janelle Martinez, are also moving away from Latinidad.
So, Oaxacan poet Alan Peláez Lopez has declared Latinidad is canceled. That was last year. Why is Latinidad canceled? First of all, it centers white and light-skinned people, and all it offers to black and brown people is assimilation into this white-centered, Spain-obsessed project. It has no decolonial potential, only the racial confusion of the blood myth, which we'll discuss later.
What I think is, yes, a lot of us might be mixed and might have European blood as well. Latino was put in place by our oppressors as this sort of slave identity that is Eurocentric for us to forget our brown roots. And that's why I don't call myself, Latin, Even though I do have some European blood, I do not call myself Latin because of the genocidal way it was used.
For me, I think identifying as Latino is white supremacy. It's Eurocentric. It's not native. It's not indigenous. There's no hint of it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't identify that way.
And it doesn't change it if you put an X at the end. Latinx.
And the X doesn't make it any more native either. Native in any kind of way.
How do you choose to identify yourself?
I personally choose to identify as a Black woman first and foremost. I also, given my family lineage being Garifuna, I will use that as well. I do go by Afro-Latina, but in recent years, my sentiments have sort of shifted a bit from using the term because I feel it's important to center my Blackness. If you're using the term and not feeling like you can interchange it with Black, this is not a term for you.
I think a lot of people in the Latinx diaspora feel disconnected from their identified home nations. The new digital wave of Latinidad seems to arise from this. Representation matters, etc., but it ends up too often being an uncritical celebration of colonial anti-Black national projects and an obfuscation of one's own personal ancestry. The enforcement of Latinidad among a huge swath of unrelated peoples doesn't actually connect anyone. It allows European descent people to present spicy, to racialize minimal experiences of xenophobia. So let's summarize a bit with this infographic from Dichos de un Bicho. Latinidad and every derivation serves four purposes at least. To establish a dominant socioeconomic and political power block commensurate with expected demographic majority status, to serve as a mechanism of negotiation with and approximation to white supremacy, to complete the colonial project of erasure of indigeneity and blackness, and to serve as a racial buffer zone between white and black populations, in particular as an obstacle to the latter. And of course, I like to live life with an open mind, so here's an open challenge to anyone. Send me a definition of Latinidad, which is not anti-black. Of course, white Latinx are going to be deeply personally offended by Alan Pelaez Lopez's cancellation of Latinidad. They're losing their access to otherness. They're losing their safe space to enact all of these kind of repressed emotions that in their minds are connected with racialized and inhuman bodies, especially black and indigenous bodies. And so when they lose this access to Latinidad, all of a sudden they're just white, right? They just come face to face with the stark reality of their solely European descent. Or, in a lot of cases, mostly. It doesn't have to be 100%. And in a lot of cases, it isn't. And so here we have another meme by Alan Pelaez Lopez, or Migrant Scribble, on Instagram, about white Latinx being personally offended by the cancellation of Latinidad. And here's a meme from Indigenous Feminisms about white Latinx finally taking a history class and realizing that their ancestors are not the brujas que los invasores no pudieron quemar, the witches that the colonizers could not burn. They actually, their grandmothers were the colonizers, right? And they're stuck in a blood myth. They're lying to themselves about what their ancestry is. Either they haven't done the research, or they ignored what their parents and ancestors told them, or they're just making stuff up because it's convenient and because we're in a current moment where that's something that's allowed and people aren't wanting to step on each other's toes about identity, right? There's a level of kind of like respecting someone's autonomy over their identity and respecting that, making the assumption that they've at least taken some steps in doing the work of understanding the specificity of where their people are from and what kind of lineages are held within their veins, right? But not everyone has done this work, and in reality, a lot of the people that feel attracted to the term Latinidad see it as a kind of way of clearing the fog and establishing something that feels like roots, right? Whether it's a kind of nationalist, anti-imperial, mixed brown, anti-capitalist, anti-American kind of Latinidad, or whether it's Spain is the motherland and we've inherited this grand Iberian culture, that kind of Latinidad, right? Or whether it's a mixed kind of Latinidad, and we'll talk about Vasconcelos and mestizaje in a little bit. La Latinidad es un mito de sangre. Latinidad is a blood myth. So the blood myth is the kind of Latinx fable of ancestry. It says that Latinos are 1/3 European, 1/3 African, and 1/3 indigenous. For example, here we have this mural in Puerto Rico. Tres razas, una cultura, la puertorriqueña. 3 races, 1 culture, the Puerto Rican. Of course, the white is in the middle. Here's an old post for me. Inside every Latinx, there's a blood myth waiting to happen. Rio Grande poet Wendy Trevino writes in her chapbook, Brazilian is Not a Race, section 13, when I say the homogenization of all ethnicities, I mean the goal was to erase black Mexicans. Jose Vasconcelos' essay, La Raza Cósmica, begins with him explaining how he thinks the human race has evolved, and it only gets worse as he goes on. He sounds like a Nazi as he lays out a hierarchy of races with black at the bottom and white at the top, though he imagines a mixed race, a new shade of white, that will trump them all. He sounds like a Nazi who believes the Indian's a good bridge, quote unquote, between the black race and the white. So mestizaje was kind of championed by this Mexican eugenicist, Jose Vasconcelos. He argued that the tripartite mixing in Latin America would lead to a new race, a cosmic race, la raza cósmica, which would be better than whites. It would be the next leader of the world, so to speak, because in his mind, before the cosmic race was the European white race, they were the kind of leaders of the world in his mind because he was, a fucking racist. Mestizaje kind of went by the wayside by the end of the 20th century, but Gloria Anzaldúa in the 80s and 90s kind of brought it back from the dead in her book Borderlands, La Frontera. She writes, Jose Vasconcelos, Mexican philosopher, envisaged una raza mestiza, una mezcla de razas afines, una raza de color, la primera raza síntesis del globo, mixed race, a mix of fine races, a race of color, the first synthetic race on Earth. He called it the cosmic race, la raza cósmica, fifth race, embracing the four major races of the world, opposite to the theory of the pure Aryan and to the policy of racial purity that white America practices. His theory is one of inclusivity. In a sense, this is true. He's imagining a melting pot in which everything that's colonized by Spain goes into that pot, and what comes out is a new, better white race, as Trevino puts it. The improved white, the mixed white, the spicy white, right? So in doing this, Ansaldúa becomes very problematic, unfortunately, and that means that her project is inherently anti-black, and anyone who's citing her uncritically needs to really reconsider that aspect of their project, and probably the project overall. It merits a deeper look at Vasconcelos himself and what he actually said. We got a taste of it from the little quote in Trevino, but let's go into an actual quote from La Raza Cósmica. Los tipos bajos de la especie serán absorbidos por el tipo superior. De esta suerte podría redimirse, por ejemplo, el negro, y poco a poco, por extinción voluntaria, las estirpes más feas irán cediendo el paso a las más hermosas. Las razas inferiores, al educarse, se harían menos prolíficas y los mejores especímenes irán ascendiendo en una escala de mejoramiento étnico, cuyo tipo máximo no es precisamente el blanco, sino esa nueva raza, a la que el mismo blanco tendrá que aspirar con el objeto de conquistar la síntesis. El indio, por medio de injerto en la raza afín, daría el salto de los millares de años que median de Atlántida a nuestra época, y en unas cuantas décadas de eugenesia estética podría desaparecer el negro junto con los tipos que el libre instinto de hermosura vaya señalando como fundamentalmente recesivos e indignos por lo mismo de perpetuación. Se operaría en esta forma una selección por el gusto mucho más eficaz que la brutal selección darwiniana, que solo es válida si acaso para las especies inferiores, pero ya no para el hombre. Okay, he says, the low types of the species will be absorbed by the higher type. In this way, the black could be redeemed, for example, and little by little, by voluntary extinction, the ugliest strains of the species will give way to the most beautiful. The lower races, when educated, will become less prolific, and the best specimens will ascend on a scale of ethnic improvement, whose greatest type is not precisely white, but that new race, a synthesis which whites will have to aspire to conquer. The Indian, through grafting with the finer race, would make the leap of thousands of years that separate the Atlantic from our Western time, and in a few decades of aesthetic eugenics, the black could disappear along with the types that the free instinct of beauty judges as fundamentally recessive and thus unworthy of perpetuation. An aesthetic natural selection would operate in this way, much more effective than the brutal Darwinian selection, which is only valid in any case for the lower species, but no longer for man. So Vasconcelos argues in a kind of eugenics of eros. Desire itself is what's going to drive the rarefication of Latinidad, right? The development of this mixed new race which will conquer the earth, which will be better than white people, better at whiteness than they are, right? But obviously what Vasconcelos is saying doesn't make sense because most Latin American countries had a national policy of blanqueamiento, or in Brazil it was known in Portuguese as branqueamiento. This is whitening, literally. People from places like the Canary Islands, Northern and Western Europe, as well as Spain and Portugal themselves, were brought over. Of course, Vasconcelos describes this eugenic process as natural, and there's a very specific reason that he does that, because he's trying to naturalize the Mexican state's project of blanqueamiento, right? This is very common. And with the specific case of the Canary Islands, this starts in 1678. The Spanish crown enacted the so-called tributo de sangre, or blood tribute, and this was a Spanish law stipulating that for every 1,000 tons of cargo shipped from Spanish America to Spain, 50 Canarian families, that is, people from the Canary Islands, would be sent to the Americas to populate the regions. especially regions that had low levels of what were called peninsulares, or Spanish-born Spaniards. So you can argue that Vasconcelos is irrelevant, I guess. I mean, they do call him the cultural caudillo of the Mexican Revolution, but a lot of time has passed, to be fair. And Ansaldúa herself, I mean, outside of Chicano studies, she's basically unknown. I actually didn't even know about her. I found out about Vasconcelos through the great scholar Inasa Crockett's blog, Anti-Blackness is a Theory. I'm not sure if it's still up, but in 2015 she posted Jared Sexton's analysis of Vasconcelos, and this is what led me to find the original work, La Raza Cósmica, the essay from 1925. So I didn't even go through Ansaldúa to learn about Vasconcelos. You know, I don't want to place too much blame on her. She did resuscitate the term. But the reason that I'm spending so much time here on the blood myth and on mestizaje and on the idea of miscegenation as some kind of like horizon for Latinidad is because it's precisely here where we find the sense of ownership that's inherent in Latinidad, the way in which it completes the colonial project from the inside out, right? So Latinidad is for white people that want to be spicy, and also for black and brown people that want to assimilate to white supremacy, or in another context, mixed to create a better white, a different shade of white, as Juanita Trevino says. But the fact is that the blood myth is just that, a myth. Ancestry is not indigeneity. Ancestry is not blackness, right? For a lot of people, their connection to these things got entirely destroyed, and they exist as a kind of buffer class between political factions of power, and people at war for resources, right? This is similar to the colored class in South Africa, a legal buffer. That's what mestizos and mulattoes are in Latin America. And it's a difficult position to be in. I understand that. It's not fun, I guess. I mean, the reality is that it's very privileged, but I try to relate to what people talk about when they complain of feeling excluded or whatever, or feeling like they don't know what their roots are. And I try to provide resources for people like, well, you can try to look into your ancestry, and you can talk to your elders and stuff, and you can actually find out about where you're from. You don't have to use generalized, commodified terms that center white and light-skinned people. You don't have to continue to contribute to colonization. You don't have to colonize yourself and others by doing blackface or redface and pretending to be stuff that you're not. You know, if it's not in your family, if people don't claim you, then you're not that, right? It's just that simple. And sometimes it is difficult to just accept that you may never have that connection to those ancestral lineages that you think you've inherited. Some disconnected mestizo people will never become indigenous. They'll never actually find out the tribes that they were disconnected from. And that's okay. We have to accept that mestizo and mulatto cultures are good and okay. And what connects them, for example, to indigenous people or to maroon communities of Afro-Indigenous people is not colonization by Spain, right? We need to, again, find more creative and truthful and useful ways of building solidarity with each other. And so that's why Latinidad is canceled, and that's why we need to be more specific about where we're from. In the interest of specificity, I wanted to share some photos of my family. Clockwise in this picture, starting from the top left, are my uncle, aunt, myself, my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, and my cousin, the daughter of the two adults above her. Here's a photo of my grandma, my mother, and myself. Here's my mom and her mom again on my mom's wedding, as well as my mom's dad. Here's my grandma and myself. Here's my mom and her brother, my uncle. Here's that same uncle and my grandma, his mother. Here's my mom's other brother and my grandma again. Here's my great-grandmother, that is to say my mom's mom's mom. Here, clockwise from the top left, are my dad, my mom, her 2 brothers, and in the bottom left, her 2 half-brothers from a different marriage from her dad. Here are my dad's parents, and in the middle, my dad's sister. And here's a somewhat large family photo of my dad's side. From the left are my 3 cousins, my dad's brother, my dad's sisters, my cousin, my sister, my cousin, my cousin, my cousin, my uncle, my aunt, and my cousin. Thanks everyone for coming. Thank you to Mandy Harris-Williams for inviting me, as well as all of the staff that made the event possible, and the other participants as well. Thank you.